This class will be concerned with operations functions, just generally introducing the idea of transposing or moving production from raw materials and from the storage of raw materials right through to the finished product. And we'll also in this session look at one approach to decision making and decision making that may be applied in the context of operations functions. But to start, operations management is the process of obtaining and utilizing resources to produce useful goods and services so as to meet the goals of the organization. So it's a good definition of operations management. It's a process of obtaining and utilizing resources. It gets the resources and it utilizes them to produce goods and services that meet the goals of the organization. So it produces output that the organization requires. It takes raw materials, it takes resources, and it processes those into useful products that meets the objectives of the organization. And presumably the objectives of the organization are to sell the output and meet customer needs so as to have long-run sustainability, long-run viability in the market. Production management is concerned with the manufacturing of goods. So we're dealing here with the manufacturing sector. Production management is concerned with manufacturing of goods. Operations management is concerned with management of service industries as well as manufacturing. So I should have made this distinction clearer, but production management is to deal with manufacturing, it's production. And that's what we're mostly concerned with in these classes because it's easiest to see. But operations management could equally be applied to service sectors. It's the operations of the business, how the business transfers or makes outputs from inputs. In the service sector, the output is made perhaps from labor directly. The service could be marketing, in which case we're using the talents of the marketing personnel, their skills, their abilities to produce a service. So there's no tangible outcome at the end. There's nothing tactile. There's nothing we can touch. It's a service. But with production management, we're dealing with manufacturing. And that's really what we're dealing with a lot of the time in these classes because it's the easier one to get a handle on. We talk about stores and we talk about production and so on. So we'll stick mostly with talking about production management, although we have to bear in mind operations management also exists, which includes both. It's a wider concept. So, having said that, the next slide is entitled Overview of Operations Management, so we are going to stick with the wider view. But here we have a set of inputs of resources, raw materials, machines, personnel, capital, land, building, utilities, information. So we have inputs, a whole series of inputs, and then we go through a transformation process. We change these inputs and we change them into output. And the output is the goods or services that are produced. So we take the inputs, we process the inputs and get outputs. And of course the outputs is what we sell. That's the output of the business which is sold on to the customers. And really operations management deals with this. If we're talking entirely in, as I said earlier, in the context of manufacturing, we'd be talking about production management, dealing with the transformation of inputs into outputs. Here we're talking about this wider concept, which may include services. And of course, having got that far, having transformed the inputs into the outputs, we control it all. We have to make sure it runs smoothly, and it runs according to some principles that we set down, some ideas of how to do it, how to do it efficiently, which may involve, in the context of production, the design of the shop floor, the stores, the sequencing of the machines and so on. If it's a service, then it may still go through various processes. Someone may collect the data, someone else may analyze the data, someone else may interpret the analysis, and someone else may present the data. So it still requires division of labor. It still requires specialists at different stages, perhaps. But whatever the type of business, be it production or services or whatever, we still have the transfer of inputs into outputs, the transformation of one to the other, and we have this control, looking after the whole process to making sure that it meets the objectives of the management. Operations management consider how the inputs are transformed into goods and services. So it looks at how this happens. How does the transformation process take place? What's the best way to transfer or to transform inputs into outputs, to transfer the essence of these, if it's raw materials, to transfer, if you like, value, the value of all the inputs, to transfer that across into the value of the output. How does it take place? So operations management is dealing with that transformation or transfer, whatever you want to call it, transformation, let's say, of inputs into outputs. Control is when is something is learned about the goods or services and is used to more effectively transform future goods and services. So in the control process, the business is learning by mistakes, it's learning by issues that arise, and it's tweaking its own processes so as to become more efficient. So the organization is a learning institution. It's learning from what it's doing. It's learning from its experiences and becoming more efficient as time goes by. Now, an example of operations management process, well, let's say a car factory or an automobile factory. We have different inputs: steel, plastic, glass, paint, tools, equipment, machines, personnel, buildings, utilities, and so on. We can list out whatever is required to make a car. And then we have the transformation process, and at the other end we get the vehicle. So it's quite straightforward. Well, at least this little diagram makes it look very straightforward. In fact, it's a very complex process, as you can imagine. Now, the questions that operations management deal with, well, first of all, the level of demand. It's necessary to know the level of demand so that the inputs can be scaled accordingly. It's pointless having too many inputs if the demand is not sufficient. Too many inputs is a waste. Not enough inputs is also dangerous, because the items will not be produced on time and the customers will be alienated. It's a balance. It's getting it right. And how many to produce? Well, should it be just production according to what the customers demand, which is similar to a just-in-time process? It's just a very lean type of production in which the output is scaled exactly to what the customer demand is. Now, with services, that tends to be the case. Services will take a contract from a company, let's say, to market a product. That's demand. That is the level of demand. And it will then work out the inputs that are required, the number of workers and the machines and the computers and the software and so on that are required to satisfactorily produce the output. It'll need to work out the number of workers. It needs to work out how many of the item to produce, and also how many workers are required to do this. And it needs to plan the production to meet the quantity and quality requirements that have been determined in the earlier schedules. It needs to set up a production schedule, have times and budgets, so that it knows what to make, what quality to make it, what quality standards should be in place, and the whole schedule and the timings and how much budget will be allocated to it. So it needs to have a very detailed plan. Now, a lot of this is dealt with in other videos in operations management, which I highly recommend to you. But it's important to get a feeling for this one in this case, because the next move we're going to do is to try and decide on decision making within operations. How do decisions get made, and how should decisions be decided upon? And the approach that we're going to look at in the rest of this session is to look at the analytical hierarchy process, AHP. The analytical hierarchy process. In fact, it's quite a straightforward technique, but parts of it may sound a little complex. But it is actually quite straightforward, and it is an approach that could be used in helping decision making within operations. So it was developed by Tom Satie. It's a decision making method for prioritizing alternatives when multi-criteria must be considered. So when there are many aspects to the decision making process, many aspects need to be taken into account, this one can decide on prioritizing alternatives, which ones should be done first, which ones should be focused on, which ones perhaps should be rejected. It's looking at a whole set of criteria, a whole set of options perhaps, and trying to select the ones to use. So often in business, the production manager or the operations manager, as we're discussing here, may have a whole range of options, but that person needs to select the ones that are most appropriate, most efficient in the context of what is required of them, of what the particular job requires. So it's trying to sort out, giving some help for decision making. So it's an approach for structuring a problem as a hierarchy or set of integrated levels. So this particular approach, the analytical hierarchy process, no surprise to say, it is trying to determine a hierarchy or set of integrated levels, a set of options that the selector may draw from and prioritize. So we have a decision to be made about how to do a particular task, how to satisfy the customers in a particular way, how to meet the requirements of a particular order. Now the production manager or the operations manager needs to draw on the resources that are at his or her disposal and draw on them rationally and decide which resources to use amongst the various alternatives that are available. Now the solution put forward by Tom Satie, it's actually quite straightforward and it's quite clever. The AHP problems are structured at 3 levels. First of all, the goal, such as selecting the best car to purchase, if that was our objective, then what's the goal of the organization, or what's the goal of the individual? If the company is going to buy cars for its sales force, then select the best car. What's the criteria? What's the company looking for in the car? Is it looking for durability, efficiency, resale value at the end of a period? What's it looking for? And the same could apply to you and I as customers. What are we looking for when we make a purchase? What's our goal? And then we have to look at criteria. The company might look at the criteria of buying a car, the cost, the safety, the appearance. The appearance may represent the company. If the car looks good, then the company looks good. So it's part of the marketing process. The people who drive the cars look very professional. But also in our case, if we buy a car, let's say, we want it as cheaply as possible. We want it good safety in case of an accident, and we also want it to look good because we're spending a lot of money on it, and it should appear to be good. And we should also look at the alternatives. We should look at a whole range of cars. We should look at all sorts of cars and try to decide amongst them. Have a wide selection. Don't just enter the market with one particular model in mind. Look at all the cars and see what's out there. Now we have to make a decision here, which car to buy. Let's say the business have to make a decision which car to buy, or which machine to buy, or whatever. It's simply a problem of making a selection. We have different criteria: cost, safety, appearance, in this case, mileage, and so on. We have different criteria in which we've got to base our decision. If we were buying a machine for a company, we would have durability, efficiency, reliability, cost. We'd have different criteria. The same thing, the same idea. We have to decide on, in different ways, look at the goal, what we're trying to achieve, the criteria, how we're going to judge it, and looking at the alternatives. We'll have the same for buying a machine in a business as we would have for buying a car. We simply have to make a decision, and we have lots of factors to take into account. Now, the decision maker measures the extent to which each alternative achieves each criterion. So let's go back for a moment. Let's go back here and look at the criteria. The criteria is the cost, the safety, appearance. To what extent is the criteria met? What is the criteria? As cheaply as possible? Should the car be middle range? What sort of safety do we require in the car? So does a particular car meet that criteria? How many cars meet that criteria? There might be more than one. There might be 10 that meet the criteria. So we have to itemize the cars as having met the criteria. Then determine the relative importance of the criteria in meeting the goal. How important are these criteria, the efficiency of the car, the appearance of the car, how important are these in meeting the goal? The goal is to, let's say, select the best car to purchase. That's the goal. It's a straightforward goal. We have different criteria: efficiency, cost, safety, so on. How important is each one of these criteria in determining the goal? The goal is to get the best car. Then we need to synthesize the results to determine the relative importance of the alternatives in meeting the goal. We need to put all of the information together to see if we've met the goal. See which car best meets the goal. So how do we capture human judgments? Because we're assessing a car here by safety, we're assessing it by appearance. It's very subjective. This is on our minds. And this often happens in production as well. The production manager will have to make decisions, and sometimes the decisions are up to the production manager to he has to, or she has to, make an educated guess. The operations manager has to figure out how to deliver a particular project and has to allocate resources, allocate people to particular tasks, and will have to use some sort of judgment. So how does the hierarchy, the analytical hierarchy process, capture human judgments? Well, for a start, AHP will never require you to make absolute judgments or assessments. So it's not absolute. So it doesn't say we pick this one. We pick this worker for this job absolutely. You would never be asked to estimate the weight of a stone in kilograms. So it's too difficult. It requires you to make a relative assessment between two items at a time. So sometimes the operations manager will look at two workers and try to decide which one is best for the task. Might look at three workers and narrow it down. Won't look at it a lot because it needs to make a decision fast, can't spend a long time trying to make the decision, but might look at two or three workers, say two workers, and try to say which one will do the job best. Who will be most efficient at this one? And what can the other worker be used for? What task can the other worker be given? What skills, aptitudes has the other worker got that could harness their abilities most effectively? So you're trying to judge one against the other. So it's using a ratio scale of assessment. It's something that's just subjective. It's in the mind of the person making the decision, but it's trying to judge one against the other. They're called pairwise comparisons. That's what this approach does. It makes pairwise comparisons. We have to make decisions. So what we do is we line up what we think is the best and perhaps even the second best, and we try to make sure that what we've got is the best compared to the next one. So we're always making pairwise comparisons. Should we try out, if we're using A, should we try out B this time just in case? Or is B working better now than A, so perhaps B should have a chance to do the job, and A should move to what B was doing. Swap them round. We're always making pairwise judgments or comparisons. And these are subjective. These are in the mind of the operations manager. Of course, the operations manager will use whatever statistics and facts to help support the decision, but they're still making a decision which is subjective. They're still making a decision which is based on their experiences and their understanding of what is best. We do it in all sorts of ways. For example, the smoothness of an object is subjective. We could take two stones, for example, and we could get the comparison based on touch. Which stone is smooth? It's very difficult to get an objective measure of smoothness. So we do it a lot of times. We do it often. And in business, we do it as well. We have to make decisions, and we have to make decisions that are best for the business. And sometimes what we do is we have to make comparisons between alternatives. And we start to select the alternative that we think is best. Suppose the two stones, one's a diamond and the other's a ruby. Well, this objective information could be used as a basis of pairwise comparisons based on the value of stones. So now we're comparing these two stones, the ones we were looking at smoothness earlier, which was very difficult. Now, if we're told that the stones are diamonds and rubies, if we were now subsequently told that, then of course the decision process will be altered. We would now look at the two stones perhaps differently. But again, we're comparing one against the other. It's still pairwise. We're still comparing the ruby with the diamond. And we're looking at the particular outcome that's required and trying to judge, is the diamond best or is the ruby best? What's required? Which is the best one to use? It's still pairwise. Consistency of judgments can also be measured. Consistency is important when there are three or more items being compared. We don't really have consistency issues with two, when we have to choose between two alternatives. We pick one and we've made the decision. It's subjective. We've made the decision that a certain worker will do a certain task because that worker we believe to be better at that task. If we have three, then we need to be consistent. we need to make the decision in a more consistent fashion. Suppose we judge a basketball to be twice as large as a soccer ball, and the soccer ball is 3 times as large as a tennis ball. Now, these are objective measures of size. We have a basketball which is twice as big as or twice as large as the soccer ball. The soccer ball is 3 times as large as the tennis ball. To be perfectly consistent, a basketball must be 6 times as large as a tennis ball. That's consistency. And of course, in decision making in business, it's important to have consistency as well. It not only affects the morale of the workers, but it actually affects the efficiency of the business. It's important to find out what is the best way of producing the products and to make decisions between the various resources that are available and make those decisions consistently. Once the best technique has been determined, then it's wise to stick with that and to rank the other alternatives appropriately and as objectively as possible. It's not always, of course, strictly possible to rank everything objectively. The case of the basketball being 6 times bigger than the tennis ball is objective. But as I said earlier, with getting workers into positions or judging the effectiveness of a particular training course against a different training course, there's an element of subjectivity. We normally do it pairwise. We compare one with the other. We need a reference point. We need to say that B is better than A. Or we need to make some decision. We need to decide there are 2 sets here. We need to decide which one is best. So we do it subjectively. We try to draw in as much objective information that we can to help us make the decision. But ultimately, it is an act of decision by the appropriate manager. And that manager will be judged by his or her decision making. There should also be consistency. When you have 3 or more resources to choose from, the selection should be consistent. If one is seen as better than the next, and that's considered better than the next one again, then there should be consistency in the selection process, like the basketball here. And it should always be selected consistently. Now, this technique has been applied in various problems. In research, for example, and in R&D. It's important to select which routes the research is going to go and to try to be consistent, to try to see what the objectives of the research is, which direction is it pointing in, and to make decisions which are consistent with what is required and with the resources available and with the skills and aptitudes of the researchers, to try and select which is the best way of configuring the research project. Of course, employee appraisal and salary increases. Well, when we look at employee appraisal, we have to be consistent as well. We have to ask essentially the same questions. We have to try and get some sort of consistency in the responses to try and make sure that the employees understand what's being appraised. Make sure that the skills and aptitudes that are being appraised in the process are accurately portrayed and discussed by the employee and by the appraiser. Product formulation, the same thing. If you're going to formulate a product, needs to look at what resources are available, be able to select from within the resources available what resources are specifically required for this particular product, and to do that consistently. Do it pairwise. Select one against the other and say, well, both could be used, but this is the better one. And if there are many that could be used, try to select consistently and make the decisions consistent over time. It's also used in capital budgeting, the same process. Medical treatment, the same way. It's important to select pairwise. Make sure that the decision is made and it compares with the next best alternative to see what other resources are there and why is the decision based on the one that's selected, and to be consistent. Products and services and service evaluations prepared by customer testing services is another potential application. Customer testing services means checking products against customer expectations, perhaps interviewing customers to see if the products match their expectations. Well, it's important that given the number of customers that are perhaps available for interview, that the number of opinions taken into account be selected carefully. The statistical process upon which the information is selected is carefully vetted also, so that there is some sort of objectivity coming back from the customers, albeit subjective information, but it's objective in the sense that the customers, if all the customers were equal, that the customer information comes back and is processed in some sort of logical, random fashion according to some sampling process. But the information that's been processed may in turn be subjective. It may be customers evaluating a product on an attitudinal scale, a Likert scale perhaps, looking at ranking the products as good or bad on a scale of 0 to 5 or whatever. We tend to be obsessed with quality rankings of all sorts of things, and this is where we have issues. We need to be careful about assessing quality as accurately as possible. We're constantly trying to evaluate the quality of one product against another product, or we're constantly trying to assess what is best in terms of quality. There are many measurement problems associated with ranking of products. Sports teams, for example. Which sport team is best? Which football team is best? Which one has the best quality? Which university is best? Which college is best? We're constantly trying to work out quality. And quality is probably best assessed, as I said earlier, with this technique by looking at alternatives and trying to work out between two, say start pairwise, between two, which one is preferable. And this might be done over many products. So it may be looking at 2 products or 3 products, but start with pairwise, start with the one that is most appealing and the one that's next, and then try to make the decision. But certain criteria have to be applied, and how important are the criteria? What's the cost of each product? What's the durability of the product? What's the warranty on each product? So that we come to a decision. But with universities, for example, which university has the best reputation? And what do we mean by best reputation? Which one gives the best results? Well, that's not a good indicator. Some universities might have very low standards of marking and might just give qualifications because they want to be seen to be given a lot of first-class honours. And perhaps a university that doesn't give a lot of first-class honours has got higher quality, perhaps. Sports teams, almost impossible to judge. Which football team is the best in the world? How do we judge that? By the number of matches they won, or by the strength of the team, the depth of the team. Uh, maybe they won all their matches just by luck. There just happened to be big strokes of luck in each match. Possible, very unlikely, but possible. So we have issues about how we judge quality, and this approach does help us to try and work out. It simply suggests pick a limited number of items and select one, and it's selected on the basis of certain criteria, and we're consistent in the application of these criteria to each of them. There's no bias in the way we apply the criteria. So we end up with a decision that is subjective, but we have taken into account the cost, the warranty, the quality, the durability, we take all of this into account if possible. When we are analysing a hierarchy, we have to take in the weights of the alternatives for each criterion. We have to look at how important each of the elements I've just talked about are. The quality, we're assessing the quality, so it would be the durability, the costs, and so on. We have to see how important are these things to us. If the cost is not a big issue, if we've got lots of resources available, we want to simply buy the best, then we might move to the next criterion, which could be durability. It could be reliability. So we need to work out the weights for the different criterion that we're using, criteria that we're using. Determining the priorities of the weights for the criteria in achieving the goal. Some of the criteria may be more important than others, depending on our resources. It could be that the cost of the alternatives is the most important criterion. So we need to, first of all, look at what's available, which we're going to choose from selectively, subjectively. But we need to look at the costs associated with each one, because that's going to influence our decision. And that might be a very important part of the decision-making process. Determining the overall weight for each alternative in achieving the goal. This is accomplished by combining the results of the first two stages, and is called the synthesis. So we take the criteria, let's say the cost of the items, or the reliability of the items in terms of the number of breakdowns they're going to have over the coming year on average. Now this gives us two measures, and if these are most important to us, then this is what will form the synthesis. These are two things we need to take into account, and this will become the big criterion that helps us to decide between the alternatives. So let me summarize it. It may sound like a vague class, but let's just, before we switch off here, let's just summarize it for a moment. We have a problem of trying to select between alternatives, and a production manager or an operations manager will have this problem more or less the same as everyone else. And the only way that he or she is going to make the decision is, generally speaking, subjectively. They've got to decide which items they need precisely, which workers will work on a particular task, how will the particular task be configured. And it's particularly an issue where production is not that standardized, where it may vary slightly from order to order. Now, what the manager will have to do is to decide what criteria it can be used to help him or her to make the decision how to configure production, or how to configure the business to meet customer satisfaction. Well, the cost of the workers, the quality of the output of each worker, the reliability of the workers. So we have various criteria that come into play, and what the manager needs to do is to take these various criteria into account. These could be objective. We can look up how much each worker is paid. We can look up the reliability of the workers in terms of attendance. We could look at the quality of the work. Were there any issues with the quality of the work in the past? So we have objective information, and we take perhaps two criteria which we consider to be very important. Let's say the cost and the quality of the work. Now, if we take those two as important, then we can start making decisions between the workers. And perhaps at a later stage, if we end up with 3 or 4 that meet these criteria, then we bring in other criteria such as reliability. And we start to filter out which ones are most suitable until we end up with the workers, or the set of workers we'll use to produce this particular product. So it's an approach to decision making, and it's one that we tend to use in our ordinary everyday lives. We tend to choose between alternatives. We tend to go to the shop and pick up 2 items, and we think we need to judge the quality, so which one will we pick? We look at the cost of each, we try to decide. We're using criteria, and we are assessing it subjectively. And that's what this technique is aimed at doing. That's a long summary. That's longer than I intended, but that completes this class, and so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.